Greetings to everyone. I hope you're all doing well. It's great to have you on another stream of the Chris Halali Show. If you're not already subscribed, please go to the YouTube channel of my show and subscribe there. If you're on the DD Geopolitics YouTube channel, go on over to the Christopher Halali official channel. We're trying to make that channel grow as well as part of the DD Geopolitics family. So it's great to see you all. Really a pleasure. Hope you all are doing well. A lot of stuff's going on, a lot of things to cover. Today is going to be a shorter show, but we're going to be focused and intense, have an intense discussion on one particular topic, which I think is important, which is on Iran's decentralized mosaic defense. And I kind of did it from Mao to the IRGC and looking at guerrilla warfare. I mean, of course, there's a long history of guerrilla warfare. We know that. It goes back to ancient times, even probably Paleolithic times, who knows? They were all doing guerrilla tactics against bigger enemies and things like that. Asymmetric warfare has always been a part of warfare. But in particular, we want to look at what Iran is planning and how Iran is already withstanding the onslaught of the Epstein coalition. So let's get into it without further ado. Shout out to everybody who's here. We've got great people on YouTube, on Twitch, on X, on Kick. So thank you all for being here. And please do support DD Geopolitics, support the channel. And we really appreciate all that you do and all the love and support that you have. All right, so let's get into it here. Let's take a look at this very big article that came out. And it came out just a few days ago or so. But I want us to go through it. And I want us to take a look at it because I think it has a lot of very interesting things to say. So it's called The Fourth Successor, Iran's Plan for a Long War, with the US and Israel. Tehran built a doctrine to absorb shock, survive decapitation strikes, and turn time into a weapon. Very, very interesting, I think. Very interesting. So this article is by Shady Ibrahim and the news agencies. All right, so let's get in on it. When Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran had spent 2 decades studying U.S. wars to build a system that could keep fighting, even if the capital was bombed, he was describing more than resilience. He was outlining the logic of Iran's defense doctrine. At the center of that doctrine is what Iranian military thinkers called decentralized mosaic defense, a concept built on one core assumption, that in any war with the United States or Israel, Iran may lose senior commanders, key facilities, communication networks, and even centralized control, but must still be able to keep fighting. Now, to pause there, as you all know, Iran has lost Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and most of his family. Iran has lost most of the top military officers in the armed forces. Iran has lost political leaders. Iran has been bombed up and down the line in terms of IRGC bases, Basij bases, police stations, you name it. And what we've seen is still the ability, even without centralized command and control, to fight and to fight effectively, to fight very effectively. So let's continue on so we can understand this a bit more. That means the priority is not simply defending Tehran or even protecting the supreme leadership itself. It is preserving decision-making, keeping combat units operational, and preventing the war from ending with a single devastating strike. In that sense, Iran's military was not built for a short war. It was built for a long one. Now, the interesting thing here, the single devastating strike, take, for example, Venezuela. In one night, the Americans came in. They killed about 100 people or so, including Cuban and Venezuelan military officials and personnel. They kidnapped President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, brought them to the US, and overnight, the state basically transformed. And it hasn't really been the same state since. In Iran's case, Iran has lost its leadership and still continues on. That says something about this strategy that I want us to investigate. And you see here, for example, Sayyid Abbas Araghchi's X post. We've had 2 decades to study defeats of the U.S. military to our immediate east and west. He's referring to the east. He's referring to Afghanistan, To the west, he's referring to Iraq. We've incorporated lessons accordingly. Bombings in our capital have no impact on our ability to conduct war. Decentralized Mosaic defense enables us to decide when and how war will end. So what is Mosaic defense? Let's take a look at this. Mosaic defense is an Iranian military concept most closely associated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, particularly under former commander Mohammed Ali Jafari, who led the force from 2007 to 2019. His picture, by the way, is in the thumbnail. So it's Mohammed Ali Jafari and Mao in the thumbnail. The idea is to organize the state's defensive structure into multiple regional and semi-independent layers instead of concentrating power in a single command chain that could be paralyzed by a decapitation strike. So clearly, they were preparing for this to happen already. Under this model, the IRGC, the Basij, regular army units, missile forces, naval assets, and local command structures form parts of a distributed system. If one part is hit, others keep functioning. If senior leaders are killed, the chain does not collapse. If communications are severed, local units still retain the authority and capacity to act. The doctrine has two central aims: to make Iran's command system difficult to dismantle by force, and to make the battlefield itself harder to resolve quickly by turning Iran into a layered arena of regular defense, irregular warfare, local mobilization, and long-term attrition. That is why Iranian military thinking does not treat war primarily as a contest of firepower. It treats it as a test of endurance. And this is key here. Why go head-to-head with the largest and most powerful army in history, the empire, the US war machine? Why go head-to-head one-to-one when you can draw them in and weaken them over time and basically drain their personnel, drain their finances, and drain their resolve for a quick victory? Because the US military is built upon quick and effective victories. And as you can see, it was denied that in Afghanistan. It was denied that in Iraq. It was denied that in many other, it was denied that in Yemen. It's been denied that in Lebanon with the Israelis. It's been denied that in Gaza. So everywhere you've seen, not to mention Ukraine, where they are losing, the Ukrainian regime is an ally of the US. They are losing territory. So this is very key. This is very key to understand here. Let's continue on here. Why did Iran adopt this model? Iran's shift towards this model was shaped by the regional shocks that followed the US invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 and Iraq in 2003. The rapid collapse of Saddam Hussein's regime appears to have left a deep mark on Iranian strategic thinking. Tehran saw what a highly centralized state looked like when confronted with overwhelming American military power. The command structure was struck, the system fragmented, and the regime fell quickly. Rather than making its military more dependent on central control, it moved towards diffusion. Rather than assuming it could match US or Israeli conventional superiority, it focused on surviving it. Iran's doctrine assumes that any invading or attacking force will have far superior conventional technology, air power, and intelligence capabilities. The answer in Iranian thinking is not symmetrical confrontation. It is to disrupt the enemy's advantages, prolong the conflict, and raise the cost of continuing it. How would it work in war? In practice, the doctrine assigns different roles to different institutions. The regular army, or Artesh, is expected to absorb the first blow. Its armored, mechanized, and infantry formations serve as the initial line of defense, tasked with slowing enemy advances and stabilizing the front. Air defense units, using concealment, deception, and dispersal, try to blunt enemy air superiority as much as possible. The IRGC and the Basij then take on a deeper role in the next stage of conflict. Their task is to turn the war into one of attrition through decentralized operations, ambushes, local resistance, disruption of supply lines, and flexible operations across varied terrain, including urban centers, mountains, and remote regions. This is where the Basij becomes especially important. Originally founded by order of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the force was later more tightly integrated into the IRGC's wartime structure. After 2007, its units were folded into a provincial command system spanning Iran's 31 provinces, giving local commanders wider room to act according to geography and battlefield conditions. That local autonomy is central to the doctrine. It means war can continue from below, even if leadership from above is degraded. Beyond the land battle, naval forces play their part through anti-access tactics in the Gulf and around the Strait of Hormuz. Their mission is to make free movement dangerous and costly through fast attack craft, mines, anti-ship missiles, and the threat of disruption in one of the world's most sensitive energy corridors. Missile forces, especially those controlled by the IRGC, serve as both deterrent and deep strike capability, aimed at imposing costs on enemy infrastructure and military targets. So we've seen, for example, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. We've seen, for example, the missiles that have been used to take out a lot of the very powerful and costly radar equipment. So that's important to understand. That's why they were targeted. They were targeted for those specific reasons. So let's continue here. Let me go back here. Then comes Iran's wider regional network, allied armed groups and partner forces across the Middle East, whose role is to widen the battlefield and ensure that any war with Iran does not remain confined to Iranian territory. So we've already seen an expansion already in Iraq with the Popular Mobilization Forces and allied militias. We've seen with Hezbollah, we've seen already escalations with Yemen, not fully yet with Ansar Allah. So it remains to be seen if other groups also participate. But certainly, this is becoming not a one country battlefield, but a regional battlefield. Instead of allowing the enemy to isolate one front and destroy one command structure, Iran seeks to spread the war across time, geography, and multiple layers of conflict. So here we ask the question of why time matters. One of the clearest expressions of this doctrine is economic as much as military. And this is something that everybody is talking about today. A Shahed drone, for example, is widely estimated to cost tens of thousands of dollars to manufacture. Intercepting it can cost vastly more once interceptor missiles and integrated defense systems are taken into account. We've seen, for example, that a Shahed drone is taken out, it costs, $10, $20, $30,000 to make, and is taken out by $1 million or $2, $3, $4 million missile. So people are beginning to get the picture that you cannot win with this kind of economic warfare, not only military warfare. That asymmetry matters because it turns time into a strategic weapon. If one side can produce low-cost weapons in large quantities while forcing its opponent to spend far more to defend against them, then prolonging the war itself becomes a means of pressure. The point is not necessarily to win through immediate battlefield superiority. It is to make the cost of stopping every threat unsustainable over time. That is one reason Iranian military doctrine places such emphasis on endurance, stockpiles, decentralization, and attrition. It is built around the possibility that the stronger side may eventually find the price of continued escalation too high. And where does this influence come from? The influence of prolonged war theory. Iran's doctrine did not emerge in an intellectual vacuum. It overlaps in important ways with the theory of prolonged war, most famously associated with Mao Zedong. During the Japanese invasion of China, Mao argued that a weaker side did not need to defeat a stronger enemy quickly. It could instead survive the initial imbalance, stretch the conflict, wear down the enemy's logistics and political will, and gradually alter the balance over time. Iran's doctrine is not a copy of Mao's model, but it shares the same central premise, that war is not decided only by relative military capability at the outset. It is also shaped by time, endurance, adaptability, and the ability to survive the opening shock. That logic influenced many 20th century conflicts, from Vietnam to Algeria to Afghanistan. It remains central to how analysts understand the staying power of weaker states and armed groups facing militarily superior enemies. So who developed this thinking inside of Iran? It's a good question. Among the most prominent ideological figures associated with this thinking is Hassan Abbasi, a hardline strategist often described as one of the IRGC's key theorists of asymmetric and long-duration conflict. Abbasi's importance lies not only in military ideas, but also in the way he connects strategic concepts to ideological narrative. In Iran's system, prolonged war is not treated purely as an operational necessity. It is also framed as a political and civilizational struggle in which society, belief, and state institutions must all be prepared to absorb pressure and keep functioning. I think that there's a similar narrative that is also at work in Russia during the ongoing special military operation, where people are certainly saying that it is critical to continue, even if it remains costly for the Russian people, simply because losing it will be a civilizational defeat as well. It will affect the Russian nation going forward. So I think that that's important to understand. This is not only confined to Iran. There are other countries and other places, other zones that are thinking about it this way. All right. So let's continue here. All right. That makes the doctrine broader than battlefield planning. It becomes a way of organizing state resilience. Muhammad Ali Jafari, meanwhile, helped translate much of this thinking into institutional form. Under his leadership, concepts such as decentralized defense, localized command, irregular response, and distributed resilience became more deeply embedded in the IRGC structure. So what is the fourth successor? Perhaps the clearest expression of this wartime logic lies in succession planning. Before his killing, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei reportedly instructed senior Iranian officials to ensure that multiple pre-designated successors existed for every key military and civilian post. The reported number was as many as 4 replacements for each senior position. That is what gives rise to the idea of the fourth successor. The point was not merely to name an heir at the top. It was to build layers of succession throughout the system so that the assassination, disappearance, or isolation of one leader would not create paralysis. Even if a first replacement could not assume control, a second, third, or fourth would already be in line. At the same time, a narrow inner circle was reportedly authorized to take key decisions if communication with the top leadership became impossible. This reflects the same logic as Mosaic defense. Do not allow the system to depend on any single node. Make it possible for the state to keep operating even after severe shock. I find it interesting that this also is very similar to some of the anarchist theories or decentralized horizontal theories that have emerged within some revolutionary movements and structures, and also political structures. So we see this sort of rhizome structure, for those of you who know rhizomes. And taking out one node, the rhizome still stands because the structures are interconnected, but also decentralized. So that is very critical here. And this is a opportunity to also think both vertically in terms of power and integration and structure, and horizontally in terms of the same. And I think that we now have a practical case study where in our modern times where this is taking shape, and you can clearly see that it is at this point effective. All right. So let's go down here. Why does this matter now? Because the doctrine suggests Iran was preparing for exactly the kind of warfare its adversaries hoped would break it quickly. The United States and Israel have long relied on doctrines of rapid dominance, precision targeting, and leadership decapitation. In that framework, destroying command centers, communication nodes, and senior figures is expected to produce systemic collapse, or at least strategic paralysis. Iran's answer has been to design against that outcome. This does not make the system invulnerable. It does mean it was built on the assumption of severe loss and disruption, with continuity preserved through redundancy, decentralization, and organizational resilience. That approach was shaped not only by foreign threats, but also by Iran's own internal history. In the years after the 1979 revolution, the new regime faced violent challenges from armed opposition groups, most notably the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, or the People's Mujahideen of Iran, who went to Iraq at that time after, whose assassinations and bombings exposed the fragility of a leadership-centered order. The Iran-Iraq War reinforced the same lesson. 8 years of attritional conflict gave the Islamic Republic experience not only in mobilization and endurance, but in governing through prolonged war. So I think that that's also important as well, because we have here the idea that Iran has also experienced an internal people's war, or at least an attempted people's war. An attempted people's war, we can look into that actually in just a few seconds. But I think that that's also interesting, that it's not only looking at East Afghanistan, West Iraq, and what happened there, looking at history, the Chinese experience, the Vietnamese, the Algerians, the Koreans, you name it, the Cubans, the other struggles, but also its own internal situation and what happened after the revolution and its own revolutionary elements within the society that sought to topple the Islamic revolution. So that's a point of great interest. So I think this is nearing the conclusion here. A doctrine built to survive shock. Taken all together, all of these point to a simple conclusion. Iran's strategy was not designed for a brief exchange of blows. It was designed for a war in which commanders might be killed, communications severed, infrastructure hit, and central authority strained, but in which the state, the armed forces, and the wider security system would continue functioning. That is the significance of Mosaic defense. It is not simply a military tactic. It is a theory of survival. It assumes that the enemy may dominate the skies, strike first, and strike hard. But it also assumes that war can still be extended, dispersed, and made costly enough to frustrate the search for quick victory. That is where the fourth successor puzzle fits in. It offers a window into a broader Iranian view of conflict, that the system must be able to absorb shock, replace itself under fire, and turn the passage of time into part of its defense. By that measure, the death of a leader, even one as central as Khamenei, was never meant to mark the end of the fight. It was something the doctrine was built to outlive. So I think this is a really interesting, very interesting article, and a lot of great points that were raised. And I think it gives us pause to think about this in other contexts and to think about this in other realms. And we've seen this, I think. We've seen this also. I think that this Mosaic defense must also apply to Hezbollah in Lebanon, to Ansarallah in Yemen, where they too have suffered setbacks, most notably Hezbollah. We saw the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, then the assassination of Sayyid Safieddin, and then we've seen the internal conflicts within Lebanon. So they also have resorted to this because now Israeli media is saying, oh my gosh, we didn't know. We were told by Netanyahu's government, we were told by the IOF that, oh, we've destroyed all their missile capabilities. They're basically destroyed. And now they're sending more missiles than at any point. And Israelis are shocked. They're running in their pajamas, as one article said, to the bunkers, thinking to themselves, we were told that this was over, but clearly it's not. So there were layers of contingencies and succession, and there were mechanisms to ensure the stability and the longevity of the movements. And I think that that's very impressive. That's very impressive. So I'm going to put the comments on stage here. I always forget to do that, but I'll put it here so that way we have it. Now let's go back and take a look at Chairman Mao. Let's read some sections because I think that this will help to, make some of this article click in the historical context and see where, some of the officials and some of the military thinkers and strategists were getting this from. It is important to note that as part of military training, especially in the officer corps, Mao's on guerrilla warfare is standard reading. It's standard reading in a lot of the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps classes, especially for the senior officers. But I of course, read it anyway because of my love for Chairman Mao and China. And also in the military context, we read it to understand guerrilla warfare. That, of course, does not mean that it translated into any tactical advantages, because as you clearly have seen, the U.S. Made one blunder after another and has not taken to heart that you cannot nation build and you cannot defeat a guerrilla insurgency effectively. And the U.S. has been absolutely a failure. It's been abysmal in what they've done. So the examples and the results are there for everyone to see. Everybody understands what's happened in the past 25 years or so, 26 years now, of the so-called global war on terror. So let's go to Chairman Mao here, and we'll start out. So this is on guerrilla warfare, written and published 1937. You can find it in the selected works of Chairman Mao, volume 6 there. And you see that it's divided into a few key sections. What is guerrilla warfare? The relation of guerrilla hostilities to regular operations. History. Can victory be attained? So let's take a look first at the definition. What is guerrilla warfare? So Mao says, in a war of revolutionary character, guerrilla operations are a necessary part. Now, we're not only talking about this, of course, Chairman Mao is speaking about a revolutionary character, but the revolution is also fighting an invader. So it's also a revolution to liberate one's country. So that's important to note as well. So this is not simply to overthrow a government. This is also to defend a nation or defend a people. This is particularly true in war waged for the emancipation of a people who inhabit a vast nation. China is such a nation whose techniques are underdeveloped and whose communications are poor. She finds herself confronted with a strong and victorious Japanese imperialism. Under these circumstances, the development of the type of guerrilla warfare characterized by the quality of mass is both necessary and natural. This warfare must be developed to an unprecedented degree, and it must coordinate with the operations of our regular armies. If we fail to do this, we will find it difficult to defeat the enemy. So let's go on. We'll read a few paragraphs, and then I want to go to different sections so we can see the type of thinking. These guerrilla operations must not be considered as an independent form of warfare. They are but one step in the total war, one aspect of the revolutionary struggle. They are the inevitable result of the clash between oppressor and oppressed when the latter reach the limits of their endurance. This language, of course, I think is very important because in the Shia conception of the world, they are fighting an oppressor, right? So you have the story of Imam Hussein, Imam Ali, you have all of these various imams, but especially Imam Hussein at Karbala, who's fighting against a leader, an oppressive leader, who's trying to change the situation, who's trying to bring justice, to bring dignity, and is eventually martyred with pretty much his whole family. So that's important because now you see, even in Mao's conception of guerrilla warfare, this type of clash is between oppressor and oppressed. And that is also part of the endurance. Because if you have a political, ideological, or religious worldview in which you are the oppressed and the oppressor is the one, people will sacrifice themselves more readily. People have something to die for. They die for their nation, they die for their people, but they die to bring justice, to bring dignity, to bring emancipation, liberation. If you're on the other side, sometimes we've seen in imperial armies, it becomes quite different because then you're fighting for a little bit more abstract things. You're fighting for the glory. You're fighting for the honor. You're fighting for the structures that you seek to preserve and expand. So the purchase of that is a little bit different because historically imperial armies were comprised a lot of, conscripted forces, slave forces, indentured, forces, captured forces. Now, of course, in a professional army, you pay them. So in this way, you buy their loyalty. Whereas in Iran's case, I'm sure that even if Iran couldn't pay the salaries of many of their fighters, they still would fight. And that is something very interesting to look at. And of course, Mao, none of these people were paying anybody. They had no real operations of that capacity at this point. In our case, these hostilities began at a time when the people were unable to endure any more of the Japanese imperialists. Lenin, in People and Revolution, said, "A people's insurrection and a people's revolution are not only natural, but inevitable. We consider guerrilla operations as but one aspect of our total or massive war, or mass war, which they, lacking the quality of independence, are of themselves incapable of providing a solution to the struggle. Guerrilla warfare has qualities and objectives peculiar to itself. It is a weapon that a nation inferior in arms and military equipment may employ against a more powerful aggressor nation. When the invader pierces deep into the heart of the weaker country and occupies her territory in a cruel and oppressive manner, there is no doubt that conditions of terrain, climate, and society in general offer obstacles to his progress and may be used to advantage by those who oppose him. In guerrilla warfare, we turn these advantages to the purpose of resisting and defeating the enemy." During the progress of hostilities, guerrillas gradually develop into orthodox forces that operate in conjunction with other units of the regular army. Thus, the regularly organized troops, Those guerrillas who have attained that status and those who have not yet reached that level of development combine to form the military power of a national revolutionary war. There can be no doubt that the ultimate result of this will be victory. So very interesting. You can clearly tell that they were reading and studying these kinds of texts. Let's go down here. This is important. So this is very interesting. All guerrilla units start from nothing and grow. What methods should we select to ensure the conservation and development of our own strength and the destruction of that of the enemy? The essential requirements are the 6 listed below. 1. Retention of the initiative, alertness, carefully planned tactical attacks in a war of strategical defense, tactical speed in a war strategically protracted, tactical operations on exterior lines in a war conduct strategically on interior lines. Conduct of operations to complement those of the regular army, the establishment of bases, a clear understanding of the relationship that exists between the attack and the defense, the development of mobile operations, and correct command. So we see there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first one, of course, it has a lot in there. So you have to retain initiative, alertness, carefully plan tactical attacks, tactical speed, tactical operations. So that's number 1. Then the 2, you have the conduct of operations. 3, bases. 4, clear understanding. 5, mobile operations. And 6, correct command. So you clearly see they were laying this out. They were laying this out to understand and to really gauge their capabilities. And you can also combine this with Mao's on theory and practice. Theory informs practice, then practice informs theory, and back and forth. So they already, at this moment, have been resisting for some time. So their practical experiences were informing this theoretical developments, and these theoretical developments would further ensure new practical guidelines. Those practical guidelines would then go onto the battlefield. They would then be informed by practical experience, which would then go back and inform theory. And it's this dialectical exchange that keeps on strengthening the ideas and the positions, and of course allowing for flexibility over time, because things change, weapons change, nations change, technology changes, all of that. Back here, Mao says the enemy, though numerically weak, is strong in the quality of his troops and their equipment. We, on the other hand, are strong numerically, but weak as to quality. These considerations have been taken into account in the development of the policy of tactical offense, tactical speed, and tactical operations on exterior lines in a war that, strategically speaking, is defensive in character, protracted in nature, and conducted along interior lines. Our strategy is based on these conceptions. They must be kept in mind in the conduct of all operations. Now, we've seen, for example, tactical offense, tactical speed, and tactical operations on exterior lines. We've already had videos of the tactical speed of even the boats in the Gulf and elsewhere that have been attacking, for example, ships that have been blowing up oil tankers and damaging them or sinking them. So we've seen already this tactical speed. That's why when Trump says we've destroyed Iran's navy, they haven't destroyed Iran's navy fully. They've destroyed some of the bigger converted vessels or vessels that they have that are the large ones that Iran already knew would be sunk. It's not rocket science. They know America's capabilities. But Iran still has thousands of speedboats lying in wait in marshes, in a covered area, hidden, tucked away, where in the middle of the night, 5, 6 people can jump in that speedboat and go out there with some explosives or drones or different types of tech and begin to take out some of the bigger ships or tankers or whatever it might be that are coming through. And we've seen this historically in war. We saw, for example, not only now, but even before, from the Battle of Salamis onwards, you've seen how smaller vessels function around bigger vessels. And smaller vessels, yes, they're less protected. Yes, they have less firepower, but enough small vessels in a tactical formation with tactical speed can destroy an entire armada. And that's happened in history many times. So Iranians are aware of this and have also taken this tactic to heart and helped to strengthen their capabilities. Let's continue here. Although the element of surprise is not absent in orthodox warfare, there are fewer opportunities to apply it than there are during guerrilla hostilities. In the latter, speed is essential. The movements of guerrilla troops must be secret and of supernatural rapidity. The enemy must be taken unaware and the action entered speedily. There can be no procrastination in the execution of plans, no assumption of a negative or passive defense, no great dispersion of forces in many local engagements. The basic method is the attack in a violent and deceptive form. While there may be cases where the attack will extend over a period of several days, if that length of time is necessary to annihilate an enemy group, it is more profitable to launch and push an attack with maximum speed. The tactics of defense have no place in the realm of guerrilla warfare. Reminder, let's read that again. The tactics of defense have no place in the realm of guerrilla warfare. If a delaying action is necessary, such places as defiles, river crossings, and villages offer the most suitable conditions, for it is in such places that the enemy's arrangements may be disrupted and he may be annihilated. The enemy is much stronger than we are, and it is true that we can hinder, distract, disperse, and destroy him only if we disperse our own forces. Although guerrilla warfare is the warfare of such dispersed units, it is sometimes desirable to concentrate in order to destroy an enemy. Thus, the principle of concentration of force against a relatively weaker enemy is applicable to guerrilla warfare. We can prolong this struggle and make of it a protracted war only by gaining positive and lightning-like tactical decisions, by employing our manpower in proper concentrations and dispersions, and by operation on exterior lines in order to surround and destroy our enemy. If we cannot surround whole armies, we can at least partially destroy them. If we cannot kill the Japanese, we can capture them. The total effect of many local successes will be to change the relative strengths of the opposing forces. The destruction of Japan's military power, combined with the international sympathy for China's cause and the revolutionary tendencies evident in Japan, will be sufficient to destroy Japanese imperialism. So there you have it, in a nutshell. You have what Chairman Mao is saying. And I think that the Iranians have read this, studied this. I know because I've read some of their academic journals in their military academies. People are interested in the past, are interested in some of the successes, are interested in some of the failures, because they need to plan accordingly. They need to plan to safeguard the people in the nation and their revolution. Don't forget, Iran is a revolutionary state. It's not a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary state, but it is an Islamic revolutionary state. It is a state that takes its teachings and takes its cues from religious texts and also from synthesis in terms of ideology. We see, for example, the importance of Ali Shariati, of the sort of anti-capitalist critique as well, the importance of justice in the society. So there are elements which were attractive to some thinkers, including Michel Foucault, who later fell out with the revolution, but in the beginning, he was actually quite interested in the Islamic revolution. And people say that he had sort of Orientalist fantasies about the Islamic revolution. But it didn't last long, that honeymoon, so to speak, that ideological honeymoon. But in any case, I think that these are important to understand. Let's come to another very prominent thinker. And many of you know this person. But I think that also it is important to read his analysis, and that is Che Guevara. This is from Che Guevara, a Guerrilla Warfare, a Method. We know that Che Guevara has a much larger text on guerrilla warfare. So let's take a look. And we can see what Che Guevara is saying at this part, because I think it's very, very interesting and noteworthy what Che is saying. If we go down here, we will see. Let's see, where was it? Let me go here. Let's see. Let me look for the part. Okay. Here. Let us think how a guerrilla FOCO can start. So we'll get into what that means in just a second. Or maybe I'll I'll do it in a second after we read this. But basically, for Che Guevara, a FOCO is a small cadre of revolutionaries operating in a nation's countryside. So that's to sum it up. You can look it up. There's also Focismo. It's been very influential and important for groups like the IRA, Red Army faction, other groups historically. So you've seen these different theories. For Che, the important was small centers that could function also like a node, that could function independently, but also had connections to other things, which is very similar to the Mosaic aspect of Iran's defense strategy. All right, so let's come here. Oh, let me just make sure I'm back here. Perfect. So let us think how guerrilla FOCO can start. Nuclei with relatively few people choose places favorable for guerrilla warfare with the intention of either unleashing a counterattack or weathering the storm. And from there, they start taking action. What follows, however, must be very clear. At the beginning, the relative weakness of the guerrilla is such that they should work only toward becoming acquainted with the terrain and its surroundings, while establishing connections with the population and fortifying the places that will eventually be converted into bases. There are three conditions for survival that a guerrilla force must embrace if it is emerging subject to the premises described here: constant mobility, constant vigilance, and constant distrust. We saw, for example, in Mao, constant mobility, that was the speed; constant vigilance, which was the importance of command and also of awareness, right? And constant distrust was not necessarily there in this instance, but it is in Che's, which is very interesting. Without these three elements of military tactics, the guerrilla will find it hard to survive. We must remember that the heroism of the guerrilla fighter at this moment consists of the scope of the planned goal and the enormous number of sacrifices they must make in order to achieve it. These sacrifices are not made in daily combat or in face-to-face battle with the enemy. Rather, they will take subtler forms, more difficult for the guerrilla fighter to resist both physically and mentally. Perhaps the guerrillas will be punished heavily by the enemy, divided at times into groups, while at other times those who are captured will be tortured. They will be pursued as hunted animals in the areas where they have chosen to operate. The constant anxiety of having the enemy on their track will be with them. They must distrust everyone, for the terrorized peasants will in some cases give them away to the repressive troops in order to save themselves. Their only alternatives are life or death, at times when death is a concept 1,000 times present and victory only a myth for a revolutionary to dream about. This is the guerrilla's heroism. For this, it is said that walking is a form of fighting and that avoiding combat at a given moment is another. Facing the general superiority of the enemy at a given place, one must find the tactics with which to gain a relative superiority at that moment, either by being capable of concentrating more troops than the enemy, or by using the terrain fully and well in order to secure advantages that unbalance the correlation of forces. In these conditions, tactical victory is assured. If relative superiority is not clear, it is better not to act. As long as the guerrilla army is in the position of deciding the how and the when, no combat should be fought that will not end in victory. Within the framework of the great political military action of which they are part, the guerrilla army will grow and reach consolidation. Bases will continue to be formed, for they are essential to the success of the guerrilla army. These bases are points the enemy can enter only at the cost of heavy losses. They are the revolution's bastions. They are both refuge and starting point for the guerrilla army's more daring and distant raids. So I present this as well because clearly we have another famous revolutionaries' writings on guerrilla warfare, and it is clear that it also has made an impact on Iranian strategic thinking, on Iranian military doctrine. You can clearly see especially the case for terrain. And why do I say that? And here we will look at this together. And we just open this up here. So if we look at Iran's terrain, which I'm sure many of you have seen, let me just get this open here. See if this will open in a new tab. Nope. You can see, let me share the screen for you all. So you can clearly see that's Iran's terrain. I mean, we're talking about an extremely fortified country. This country is the ideal country for guerrilla warfare. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. This is the dream of any military strategist and thinker for guerrilla warfare. It is truly a mountain fortress. And that is why it has been so difficult to conquer. Of course, it has been conquered historically at great cost. But we remember, for example, the Mongols, Hulagu Khan, who came in there. But that was at a weak point of Iran, and Iran was not yet a unified nation. We've seen that when it's unified, it becomes very challenging to take the territory. So I think that we should understand this. We should understand that Iran's strategic thinking, Iran's military thinking, very much uses the terrain to its advantage. It sees the terrain as a natural ally. Of course, it's the nation. And using that terrain, you can see what Che said and what Mao said. Clearly, if you can imagine here, there will be IRGC, Basij, local paramilitaries that will use the terrain to pick off American forces, American logistics, if they put boots on the ground. If I was in the US military, I would be very, very concerned. I would be very worried. I would be up at night sweating, thinking about a ground invasion of this kind of country. Because if you look at neighboring Afghanistan, which you can see, there are mountains, of course, Tora Bora, we remember, and those mountains serve the Taliban very well. There's also a lot of open space. There's also some vast areas that are much more open. Iran is mostly mountainous, and there are some parts that are open and more barren, but in few fertile parts that you can see in the region here in the topography that you see there. But it's important to recognize that the US is going to have a very big battle ahead if it commits to troops. Now, it could, for example, as some of you have been noting in the chat, and we've been aware, it could, for example, try to capture Karga Island or some of the islands in the Persian Gulf to try to starve Iran of its oil revenue. It could try to take port cities. It could try to not go all the way inland, but to begin to slowly carve Iran from the outside. That is possible. There's no doubt. But then the US has a fundamental problem. It doesn't have necessarily friends on any side. If it takes the islands, it has the Gulf, the sea around it. If it takes, for example, territory, it has either unfriendly nations or unfriendly groups in friendly nations that will be around to pick them off and to do asymmetric warfare. And not to mention, you still have drones flying around. You still have possible missiles flying around. So this is not in any measure an easy fight for the Americans if they commit boots on the ground. It's just not. And I think that anybody who thinks that they can have an easy victory after learning about the decentralized mosaic defense, after understanding the theories behind that go back to Mao, that go back to Che, that go back to a lot of the revolutionary movements and national liberation struggles of the 20th century and even before. If you look at all that, if you take that as a whole, then you understand that this is the worst nightmare for the US. Iran is a country, 80 to 90 plus million people. Iran has a million plus strong army, plus militia, plus local forces, plus those that will join forces, those who will commit themselves after the US makes an invasion of the country. So there you go. There you have it. And I think that we have to really understand that Iran is playing a long game. Iran is not playing a short game. And that's why Iran said that it will decide when this war is over. And that's part of its strategic thinking. I think the Americans are already feeling the pinch. I think there's a lot of disapproval in the US for having gone on this adventure that was really pushed by the Israelis, and who knows with what else behind it. But I think that everyone is realizing that they've opened Pandora's box and they can't close it now. And the forces that they've unleashed, they can't control. So for those of you who are interested in chaos theory and things like that, in what we call dynamic mathematics, or non-linear thinking, this is exactly what's at work here. And I think that that's what's keeping military planners up at night. Clearly, there are some people who are very uncomfortable. You can bomb Iran for 10 years. It does not mean that you can take Iran. And that's very, very important at this point. So I'm going to open it up for any questions, any thoughts. If anybody has anything quick, I wanted to just do a quick hour with you all, because I think it's great to read stuff together, to think about these topics together, and to really digest what's happening around us, and to think strategically, not just okay, we can think in tweets and sound bites, but we should think also strategically, theoretically, in the large sense, to understand what's behind a lot of what we're seeing. So any thoughts? Anybody in the chat want to ask any questions? I agree. The real nuclear threat is not Iran. Not Iran at all. And I think that that's very important to understand. Do I think that this war will merge with the Ukraine war? I think it already has merged with the Ukraine war, because we've seen not only the situation between the relationship between Ukraine, Israel, also the use of Iranian technology in that war, and also now the use of Ukrainian specialists in the Middle East, or special technologies they're already trying to exchange and things like that. So these are already connected. I would say that these constitute parts of a much larger struggle to maintain US hegemony against the developing multipolar world, and showing the weakness of the multipolar world as it's being born. I call these the birth pangs of the multipolar world, and clearly they're violent as well. But you see that the US is a belligerent power. Israel is a rogue state. The Zionist entity is completely out of control. It even has messianic expectations, as we heard today from Netanyahu. And we also have the Six Fingers. Who knows what's going on over there? I don't know. But I can tell you that seriously, there's some issues. We have questions over whether Netanyahu is even alive, whether the video was AI. I'm not sure yet. But I can tell you that if he's not alive, I hope he's in hell with Epstein and the rest of the gang. That's where they need to be. So I think that to conclude, we have a great question here. Do you think that 2,500 troops could do anything to take Karg Island? I think that they could theoretically take the island. I don't think that it's not out of the realm of possibility. The question is, what does it mean to hold the island, and at what cost? So I think that you could take the island, but even if you take the experience of the Russians at Snake Island, eventually the Russians gave up Snake Island, because it's very hard to hold an island when you are surrounded by unfriendly territory and unfriendly ships and unfriendly aerial assets. Eventually that island becomes a tomb. And that happened in the case of Russia and Snake Island as well. So you have to be strategic. That's not to say that Russia doesn't have every right to Snake Island, but it does mean that you have to be strategic as to when you take this territory. You have to be strategic as to when you plan for expanding the possible operations into places where it's very hard to maintain your control, your command and control, and very hard to defend when you're completely surrounded. Karg Island will be that kind of case. Imagine Shahid drones just flying all day, every day onto that island. Boats, going around the island. I mean, certainly the US can try to protect the island as much as possible, but the island is just out there, alone. And that's, I think, a very big problem. How likely is Iraq to join Iran? Well, I mean, some Iraqi militias have joined Iran. We've already seen it. We've seen PMF and other militias that have joined in the struggle that that have put themselves in a position to fight and defend Iran, and that's been happening. There's no question about it. Whether Iraq as a state does it, I don't think so at this point. I don't think so. Certainly, I think the sentiment is there for a large part, but I think that no, I don't think that Iraq as a state will join. But I think many of the militias and forces aligned with Iran or ideologically committed to this struggle will. They will. Well, I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all again for a phenomenal stream. It was great to see you all. Great to be with you all. A great hour spent. Continue to read, continue to study, continue to do all the good things. Keep your minds open, keep your minds sharp. For those of you who are Iranian or have family in Iran, like I do, we are standing together. We are in solidarity. This is our nation. We are the nation of Imam Hussein, and we will never abandon Palestine. We will never abandon the anti-imperialist cause. We will always struggle for the dignity of all people. So stay strong, stay together, and thank you again to everyone. Kalinichta, spokojnej noche, shab bakher, and wishing you all a very good night from here in Moscow. Take care, everyone. All the best.